Melville Fuller was born in Augusta in 1833. I would say that he was a Maine boy who made good. Although he was, as I say, a fairly shy and retiring fellow, and in part that was due to the fact that his parents were divorced at an early age, and he had to kind of mediate between his mother, his grandfather, Nathan Weston, who was the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in Maine, who was a strong-willed person. So I think that's how Melville came about being a mediator on the Supreme Court. This courthouse was one in which Melville Westfield Fuller practiced when he was up here briefly, and he was admitted to the bar in Kennebec County. And Kennebec County has a little book in which all the attorneys who are admitted to the bar in Kennebec County sign in. And Melville Weston Fuller's name appears there, and when attorneys today are admitted to the bar in Kennebec County, the presiding justice who swears them in invariably points out Melville Weston Fuller's signature on there as the only Chief Justice from Maine. Some say largely as the result of a busted romance, he decided to go west like many young men did at his time, and he went out to Chicago, where he prospered. In 1888, Grover Cleveland nominated him to the Supreme Court. He thought because of Fuller's stature as a lawyer from that state, and there weren't any other lawyers from that part of the country, that Fuller would be a good choice. There was initially a few problems with Fuller's nomination because there was some question as to his position during the Civil War. Fuller was very much anti-slavery and in favor of the Union, but he did not participate in the Civil War as a soldier, so there was some question as to his loyalty to the Union. But that was resolved, and eventually several Republicans crossed the aisle, and he was nominated and took his seat in the court in 1888. Well, of course, many people remember the infamous case of Plessy versus Ferguson, which is one of the Supreme Court's great self-inflicted wounds. In that case, the plaintiff was a gentleman named Homer Plessy, who was part African American, and he decided that he wanted to get a seat in a train in Louisiana. So Plessy was denied his seat on the railroad car reserved for whites, and he brought suit to compel the railroad to take him on in the car reserved for whites. The justice who decided the case was Henry Billings Brown, but my ancestor joined in the majority opinion, which established this odious doctrine of separate versus equal, which was not overturned until the Brown versus Board decision in the 1950s. The commentators who have written on this case and Fuller's role in it seem to focus on the fact that the basis of the decision was not so much prejudice against African Americans, but a question of states' rights. The justice said that the states had a right to determine what they wanted to do as far as determining who could sit where on the railroad, and the federal government had no business intruding on this. And again, that was the law of the land. He was generally thought of by his peers as a very good administrator on the court. He had to deal with a large number of strong personalities, and he was very good at moderating between them. There was a situation in which John Harlan, the justice, was reading a draft of his opinion, and Oliver Wendell Holmes, who was never known to be shy and retiring, snorted, "Well, that won't wash, that won't wash." And Fuller said, "Well, let's scrub away, let's scrub away." He also introduced the custom of having each justice shake hands with every other justice before the case conferences, and that's a tradition which has persisted to this day. So he's largely remembered as a good administrator, and he also parceled out many of the more important cases to the other justices, and he did not hog the big opinions, so to speak. He was not interested in going down in history as the writer of opinions in the really important cases. Fuller was a man of short stature. He was only about 5 feet 3 inches tall, and when he went on the court, they had to raise the chair behind the bench so he would be on the level with everybody else. He looked a lot like Mark Twain and was sometimes mistaken for him. But Mark Twain turned the tables in one famous interview when someone came up to him and said, "Oh, are you Chief Justice Fuller?" And he said, "No, it's lovely to be full, but it's even better to be fuller. My name is Mark Twain." Fuller served until 1910, which at that point was longer than any other Chief Justice except John Marshall. And I think at the time he died, the principal focus in the eulogies was on what a dignified, polite person that he was and how well he handled the court. And I think that's a pretty good legacy.